Welcome to All Pro Football Data. My name is Jim Coburn. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the 2024 NFL Draft Class based on data and specifically the Arizona Cardinals Draft Class. So we're going to be looking at all the data profiles of the players selected by the Arizona Cardinals based on production, athleticism, and other statistical factors. One important note to say before we get into it is we're going to look at draft pick approximate value. So this takes a look at what the average approximate value is for the picks that were selected. We're also going to look at the draft pick approximate value pick range. So this kind of gives you an idea of what is usually expected from a player selected at various places in the draft. So that's going to kind of give you an idea of that here. We're also going to look at EAV, or expected approximate value grade, also known as a ceiling grade, which this is essentially their data grade. So it takes a look at their production, athleticism, physical metrics, whatever relevant statistical data there is for that prospect is then boiled down into one number to determine what the average AV, or approximate value, that prospect is based on all of his statistical data. So in other words, the players who tested well in numbers that correlated more scored better versus players who correlated less who scored worse, essentially is what that metric is. As with all things, data and probability is not certainty. So there definitely is going to be some things in the future that may not be exactly what the data says, but at the same time, it is very accurate in terms of determining the different ranges of possibilities of different prospects. Then, of course, you have limiting factors. So this is something I think that you guys should know is what limits the grading system that I use. And it could be the coaching of the team can affect the development of players. It could be the publicity of the media market can influence perception of a prospect, leading to inflated grades. It could be injuries that lead to inconsistent outcomes. It could be psychological and mental makeup that can affect NFL outcomes in terms of addictive personalities, different stuff like that. And of course, you have substitution bias, which is the possibility that coaches switch from a higher costing prospect to a lower costing prospect who might be lesser quality, but they're trying to save money. And this happens every single year in the NFL. You're always going to have teams that are drafting prospects to fill needs and to fill spots that are going to be lost because they don't have the money to pay a star player. So those are kind of the limiting factors. Again, these are the things that kind of affect the numbers in terms of the results. And then, of course, let's get to Arizona's needs. So this chart right here shows every single selection, or I should say every single player that the Arizona Cardinals have on their roster right now, pre-draft, so before the draft, and kind of shows you how they performed in terms of their data grade and also in terms of their actual NFL performance, which is what the NFL AV number is. So in terms of the biggest needs for the Arizona Cardinals, to kind of boil it down to make it a little easier, is the needs on offense are running back and wide receiver. Running back because James Conner is a very good running back, but at the same time he's also very old, so they need to get younger at that position. Another thing they also need to worry about is the wide receiver position. They effectively got rid of a lot of their wide receivers before the draft, so they needed to kind of fill that position as well. And then the fifth need on offense would probably be the offensive line, which overall has needs here and there. Probably left guard would probably be one of the bigger needs here. Then, of course, you have the needs on defense. So defensively, edge is definitely an area that they need improvement. Linebacker is another area that needs improvement. Defensive tackle, cornerback are also areas that need improvement. But the offense definitely has much more of a strength here compared to the defensive side of the football. So they probably are going to go defensive heavy in this draft. Which brings us to the biggest factors in the final grade. So again, before I get to the pick-by-pick analysis, the biggest factors in terms of my grading of these teams is, did they meet your roster's needs? Did they draft good prospects? Did they draft prospects that have the data potential to outperform their draft status? So essentially, if you are a team that drafts prospects that are not going to outperform their position in the draft, why draft them? I mean, you're already going to have a very low shot of those prospects making it in the NFL anyways. in terms of drafting him in the 5th, 6th, 7th round. So if you're going to draft a player that has a significantly low shot of becoming an NFL player in the 6th, 7th round, I just don't see the value in that. I think you need to draft prospects that have the data potential to outperform their draft status. Regardless if you view them as a backup, regardless if you view them as just a special teams player, I think you need to draft players that are always potentially going to outperform where they're drafted, which is another big factor in terms of the final grade. And then these are all the questions that data can give some answers to, and we will start to answer those questions now. So first off, we have pick number 4, Marvin Harrison Jr., wide receiver out of Ohio State. His data grade or ceiling grade was 99.76 out of 100. His projected floor grade, so the floor grade is essentially the average AV of the prospects that tested similar to him in the first round. So the average floor for a prospect like Marvin Harrison Jr., who tested similar to him as a prospect, will be 88. And of course, his ceiling is a 99.76. So he has the potential to be a Hall of Fame wide receiver, and his floor is closer to a long-term starting wide receiver. The balanced grade, which is essentially the floor and the ceiling kind of combined, is 93.88 out of 100. And the average AV or pick AV, which is the average approximate value of the selection of pick 4, is 98.84 out of 100. So the vast majority, the average AV of picks selected at pick 4 is 98.84 out of 100, which can kind of put that in perspective in terms when we're talking about AV here. Now, the overall pick grade, I would say, is an A. Overall, great pick, great selection. I mean, there's nothing else to really say. When you look at his market share production, so now we're actually going to get into his actual production data. He had extremely good receiving market share, total offensive market share, and touchdown market share traits. He also had great efficiency scores as well. All those scores were in the 80 to 90 percentile in terms of touchdowns per touch and yards per touch, or receptions per touch. Yards per reception, excuse me. Athleticism-wise, now, Marvin Harrison Jr. did not do any testing that you would kind of say is normal for most people because, he didn't go to the combine and do any testing. He didn't do the 40-yard dash. But there was data reported from NFLDraftScout.com in terms of what his testing was in like spring ball games and those kinds of things. There also was testing reported by The Athletic, which is a magazine that had some numbers here and there in terms of his short shuttle and I think it was his broad jump or his vertical, one of those numbers. But I was able to kind of piece together an athleticism estimate based on all those numbers. And the estimated athleticism of Marvin Harrison Jr., even though he didn't test, the estimated athleticism was actually pretty impressive. 90 percentile in terms of speed, 90 percentile in terms of flexibility for his size, and then 80 percentile in terms of explosiveness for his size. So that's kind of what his estimated athleticism is, which is an elite level athlete at the wide receiver position. If he wasn't quite that, I mean, it is what it is. But overall, great athleticism traits from Marvin Harrison Jr., at least what was reported, prior to his draft season, if you will. Then, of course, we get to adjusted production score. So adjusted production takes a look at strength of schedule, strength of team, and, of course, the age of a prospect to see how well they tested. And when you look at Marvin Harrison Jr.'s adjusted production scores, he was elite. He has all-pro potential in terms of his age, his MSA rating, and his pass rating as well. So when you take a look at all that stuff combined, you get to the point where, okay, Marvin Harrison Jr. is an elite producer. He has elite level athleticism, at least estimated elite level athleticism, and he has elite adjusted production traits for his overall career in college. It's easy to see why he was the 4th pick in this draft, and I think it'll be a fantastic pick for the Arizona Cardinals moving forward. Now we get to pick 27, which is Darius Robinson, defensive tackle from Missouri. His data grade or ceiling is 84.56 out of 100. His projected floor is 72.04 out of 100. His balanced grade is 78.30, and his pick AV, or the average AV of the selection that he was selected at pick 27, is 84.17. I would give this overall pick grade a B. Taking a look at Darius Robinson in terms of his data, He had pretty decent defensive market share production for the 3-4 defensive end position in terms of all of his data, 80 percentile in terms of most of his traits there in terms of solo tackles, sacks, and tackles for loss. Taking a look at his other market share data in terms of forced fumbles, pass deflections, interceptions. He did really well in terms of his interception market share, but not so well in terms of forced fumbles and pass deflections at the position. And then, of course, when you get to athleticism testing, this is the area where there was some concerns. He had above average explosiveness, average speed, and then below average flexibility for his size. So most All-Pro and Pro Bowl 3-4 defensive ends score a lot better than this in terms of their speed and their flexibility, especially. So that's kind of a little bit of a concern. But overall, he has a good athletic profile. It's just you would expect somebody like him, at least a pick in the 20, pick 27, to have better athleticism traits. But that's just kind of is what it is with him. And then, of course, we get to adjusted production traits for him as well. And when you get to that area, he did well. He's sort of closer to a starter than an All-Pro and Pro Bowl player. And that's kind of what I'm going to project him as. I think he definitely has starter potential for the Arizona Cardinals. And I think that's what you should expect out of him going forward. But he does have that athleticism testing that is a little scary. It's a little scary to see what he's going to become long term because of that athleticism testing. Then we get to pick 43, which is Max Melton, cornerback out of Rutgers. His data grade is 92.33 out of 100. His projected floor grade is 70.65 out of 100, with a balanced grade of 84.49 out of 100. And the average AV of where he was selected was 81.08 out of 100. So essentially, they got a prospect who was pretty much in line with what's expected at where he was drafted. The overall pick grade for him would be a B. Taking a look at his production traits, he had a fantastic interception score of 92 percentile with below average solo tackle data and average pass deflection data. So he kind of was better at getting interceptions versus tackling and getting pass deflections and coverage. When you take a look at his athleticism traits, he had a really high 80 percentile explosion trait with above average speed and about probably, I think he had 39 percentile in terms of flexibility for his size. Athleticism-wise, this is a zone corner profile. This is kind of like a Richard Sherman-like athleticism profile in many ways. And I think there is some chance that he could be very successful with this as long as he plays in more of a zone type of scheme, not a scheme that kind of asks him to change directions a lot. Then, of course, we get to his adjusted production traits, which based on his adjusted production, he tested really well. His age score was in the close to the 90 percentile, and he also had a close to 90 percentile overall adjusted production score as well. So based on his overall data profile, I would say Max Melton tests really well. And I think he has a shot to be a starter. I think he's a good selection. I think there are some weaknesses in terms of his overall data profile, but he still has pretty decent all-around data. Then, of course, we get to pick 66, which is Trey Benson, running back from Florida State. His data grade or ceiling is 90.97 out of 100. His projected floor grade is 69.69 out of 100. His balanced grade is 80.33 out of 100. And the average AV of where he was selected is 72.97 out of 100. So the overall pick grade would be a B. He does have that potential to be a 90-plus percentile running back prospect in many ways. But based on where he was drafted and based on the floor of where he tested with other running backs, he would be closer to like a B in terms of that. Now, looking at his market share data, not that impressive. Average total offensive market share, above average passing or receiving market share, and above average touchdown market share, but he doesn't really have any elite numbers at the position, which is a little bit concerning. Taking a look at his efficiency scores, this is where he actually did really well. He was very efficient in terms of his yards per touch, touchdowns per touch, and his yards per reception. So he was somebody who didn't get a lot of production in terms of market share data, but did really well in terms of efficiency at the position, which is what you want to see. Taking a look at his athleticism traits, he did have a 90-plus percentile speed score with a 57 percentile explosion score. This type of running back would kind of be like a DeMarco Murray type of player, a player that has a lot of speed but isn't quite the most explosive running back overall. And then, of course, he gets his adjusted production traits, which Trey Benson kind of ends up in the All-Pro, Pro Bowl potential area, probably closer to the Pro Bowl starter area in terms of his overall data for his age. So this is a good start. I think he does have the potential to eventually become the starting running back for the Arizona Cardinals, especially with the age of James Conner. And overall, it's just a good pick. I think it's a really solid pick for them in day 2. Then we get to pick 71, which is Isaiah Adams, offensive tackle, who's going to be put at guard. Remember when I told you one of the biggest needs at the beginning of the video was left guard, and they kind of found one here in Isaiah Adams. His data grade is 64.12 out of 100. His projected floor is 65.58, and his balanced grade is 64.85 out of 100. His pick AV is 76.45 out of 100. Overall, I would give this pick grade a D. And the main reason why is because the average AV of picks that are selected here is usually about 76.45. And they took a prospect that is likely going to be what is normally expected for how he tested in terms of being like a 65 percentile type of prospect, which is kind of like a backup in many ways. And you're going to be starting him. So there is a little bit of a concern with that. Now, when you look at his athleticism testing, he did have good athleticism. His data shows, below average explosiveness with above average speed and above average flexibility for his size. So this is actually decent traits at the guard position, but it's closer to a starter than an All-Pro or Pro Bowl type prospect in many ways. So the explosiveness is a concern, but he does have decent speed and decent flexibility, and he is currently probably going to end up being the starter when the season comes around, so he might do really well. But those are just the general concerns, is that he's not the most explosive player in terms of his lower body strength. Then, of course, we get to pick 82, which is Tip Reaman, tight end out of Illinois. His data grade or ceiling is 73.96 out of 100. His projected floor grade is 40.29, and the balance grade for him is 57.12. The average AV of this selection is 61 out of 100, with the overall pick grade of an F. Now, when I say an F, it's not to say that Tip Reaman is not going to potentially become a really great starting blocking tight end, but it just means to say that this pick is not kind of going above what's expected for this selection. So they didn't really hit it out of the park. They kind of hit below par is essentially what this is. But he does have good data. Based on his production data, he had a above average touchdown score in the 61 percentile. Everything else was below average, though, in terms of his receiving and his total offensive market share. Taking a look at his efficiency scores, this was an area where he did better in terms of TD percentage versus his yards per reception score. So he kind of has that going for him. He's kind of a touchdown maven type guy, and that might be something he might end up at the NFL level. So I will be excited to kind of see what happens with him. He might be a decent kind of waiver wire pickup, if you will, in terms of matchups week in and week out. Then, of course, we get to athleticism traits, which he was very great in terms of athleticism. 90-plus percentile explosion, speed, and flexibility for his size. He's one of the most athletic tight ends in this draft class, and it shows up in terms of his data and on film as well. But he's more so a blocking tight end. I think that's what he is going to be at the next level, a starting blocking tight end who can kind of catch occasionally, but keep an eye on him. I think his touchdown production is very good, and I think there is a potential you could see something special out of him, especially with Kyler Murray, throwing him the football. Then, of course, we get to adjusted production traits, which is the final thing on him. And when you look at his adjusted production, he's closer to a starter than a Pro Bowl or All-Pro player. Again, most prospects who tested like him based on his production traits usually end up becoming backups to rotational starters. And that might be what he ends up being, but he does have some interesting traits, again, that may be indicative of somebody who can become, a Pro Bowl or long-term starting tight end if he finds the right role. Then, of course, we get to pick 90, which is Elijah Jones, cornerback out of Boston College. His data grade is 55.20 out of 100. The projected floor for cornerbacks that tested like him in his area of the round or the range of picks is 41.62. His balanced grade is 48.41, and his average AV is 60.62 out of 100. This overall pick grade would be an F. Most cornerbacks that tested like Elijah Jones just end up becoming backups. And when you look at his production traits, he does have some decent production. He had a 91 percentile pass deflection score and a 69 percentile in terms of interception data. But then when you look at his athleticism traits, he just has really good explosiveness, 80 percentile with below average speed and below average flexibility. Could he be the next Richard Sherman? Maybe. I mean, the athleticism traits are there for him to do that, but Richard Sherman definitely was an outlier compared to all the other cornerbacks that were drafted in his position. Then, of course, you get to adjusted production traits, which takes a look at Elijah Jones as well. Age-wise, very older prospect. Pass score was only average, and that's why he kind of got an F because of his adjusted production traits. So he had good production, good explosiveness, age and level of competition and everything else like that really lowered his grade, and that's kind of the biggest issue with him. Then, of course, we get to pick 104, which is Dayon Taylor Dimerson, safety out of Texas Tech. The data grade or ceiling for him is 92.99 out of 100. The projected floor grade is 58.41 out of 100, and his balanced grade is 75.70 out of 100. His pick AV is 53.28 out of 100. And I would say the overall pick grade is a C. He does have the potential to be a really great safety prospect and a starter for them. But again, based on where he was drafted, based on the average floor of the players that were drafted where he was at, that's what kind of lowers his grade a little bit. But still a great pick. I mean, you got a potential starter at the very beginning of the fourth round, which is fantastic to me. In my opinion, it is. Now, when you look at his data, good production traits, 95 percentile in terms of interceptions, 70 percentile in terms of solo tackles and pass deflection data at the safety position. Taking a look at his athleticism traits, almost like his production, 90 plus percentile speed with above average explosiveness and above average flexibility. All those numbers are definitely what you want him to hit. Then, of course, you get to his adjusted production traits where his pass score was fantastic, 90 percentile, but he is a little bit older as a prospect. So a lot of times older prospects usually become starters versus high quality starters. So that's kind of what age is in many ways. The analogy I always give people is when you're planting a seedling, you typically want the seedlings that are bigger than the other ones, because when you get a seedling that is very productive at a younger age, they're eventually going to grow into be a much larger tree and much more productive tree compared to other plants. So that's kind of what age is. It's not really something to really knock a player off too hard on, but it does factor into their ultimate upside and potential at the next level. Then, of course, we get to pick 138, which is Xavier Thomas, edge from Clemson. His data grade or ceiling is 30.35 out of 100. His projected floor grade is 37.85 out of 100, and his balanced grade is 34.10 out of 100 with the AV of where he was selected at 45.46 out of 100. Overall grade is an F. It's crazy to think that they selected somebody who the average pick that's selected there usually becomes a 45.46 approximate value prospect, and they got somebody who tested worse than that. So that's kind of why it's an F. Now, when you take a look at his production, this is why it was an F. Below average in terms of solo tackle, sack, and TFL data. Taking a look at his edge rusher market share data, his forced fumble market share was above average, but his pass deflection data was below average. So that's kind of another thing to kind of look at there. Then, of course, you get to athleticism traits. Above average speed, below average explosiveness, and did not do the short shuttle 3-cone to determine flexibility, which is a little bit of a concern. But the biggest concern with Xavier Thomas comes down to his adjusted production trait. Really low age score, really low MSA rating, and really low pass rating. He's below the starter threshold, which is a very low threshold. And that's the biggest concern is you're looking at a player that probably is more likely going to be a backup to practice squad player based on his overall data. He might surprise everybody and become an outlier, but you're talking about an outlier that late? I mean, geez, I don't really see that happening for him. It's possible, but I don't see that happening for him. Then, of course, we get to pick 162 with Christian Jones, offensive tackle out of Texas. His data grade or ceiling is 79.72 out of 100. Projected floor grade, 29.69 out of 100. And his balance grade is 54.70 out of 100. His average AV is 35.14. And his overall pick grade would be an F. Now, a lot of that is a little bit of where he was drafted, because where he's drafted, there's really not a lot of successful players. I'm taking a look at his athleticism traits. He does have near elite speed with below average flexibility, but we don't know what his explosiveness is. He didn't test in that particular area, and that flexibility is a bit of a concern. Now, he is more likely going to be a backup type player, but it is what it is. He has to be graded as such. You know, if he's going to add value to your team and it's just as a backup, then that's really not going to be the biggest attaboy, great pick selection, if you will, in terms of him. Then, of course, we get to pick 191, which is Palmer, wide receiver out of UAB. He had a 57.26 data grade or ceiling. His projected floor grade is 25.21, and his balance grade is 41.23 out of 100. The pick AV is 25.87 out of 100. So most players selected at 191 ended up with a 25 percentile approximate value score in their career. Overall pick grade would be an F, and that's again just mostly has to do with what he might become at the next level. It is very unlikely he's going to outperform his draft status and his data grade, with both those things being so low. Getting to his production, pretty much above average, but nothing elite or starter level here. Taking a look at his efficiency scores, he did have good efficiency. Athleticism-wise, he did have near elite speed and above average explosiveness, though, but his adjusted production was below the starter averages at the position. So overall, Palmer looks like a player who, based on his draft status, based on his data grade, all those factors kind of roll into one, where it's very unlikely that he's going to become a starter for the Cardinals at any point in his career, which is why he got an F. Then, of course, we get to the last pick of the draft for the Arizona Cardinals, Jayon Davis, cornerback out of Miami. His data grade or ceiling is 22.20 out of 100. His projected floor grade is 38 out of 100, and his balance grade is 30.10 out of 100. The average AV of this pick is 14.1 or 14.29 out of 100. Overall pick grade would be an F. Now, yes, he does have potential to be above what is expected at that area, but the best expectation is for him to become a backup. So that's kind of the biggest thing that kind of hurts his grade overall right here. Taking a look at his production traits, decent solo tackle data, decent, or I wouldn't say decent, but below average pass deflection data with significantly below average interception data. So he was good at tackling, but wasn't really doing much in terms of interceptions or pass deflections. Taking a look at his athleticism testing, though, he had above average speed with below average explosiveness and significantly below average flexibility for his size, which is a little bit of a concern. And then, of course, in terms of adjusted production traits, he pretty much was just average in terms of this particular area. Overall, the final grade that I would give the Arizona Cardinals would be a C. Did they meet all of their roster needs? I would say no. The edge rusher position wasn't really met 100%. There was a lot of other positions that they kind of just didn't really fill. Did they draft good prospects? Absolutely. And I know I'm going to get some flack for giving them a C, but when you look at their collective draft as a whole, you know, they drafted a lot of players, and the players that were drafted closer to the first round are probably going to be better than the ones drafted past maybe Dimerson. I think would probably be the drop-off point where the picks are just kind of fluff, if you will. Now, did they draft prospects that have the data potential to outperform their draft status? I would say no. Most of the picks they drafted were within range of what's expected of where they drafted, or they were prospects that were below what is expected of where they were drafted. which is kind of the issue with their overall draft. Now, the one thing I will say, though, is that they drafted well in terms of day 1 to 2, and overall, they have about 5 prospects with potential to become starters or better, but many of their selections did not have data indicative of NFL starters. So what I'm saying is this: the Arizona Cardinals are going to come out of this draft with 5 players more than a lot of teams that are going to end up becoming long-term starters for them, and possibly high-quality starters. Marvin Harrison Jr., I think, is going to be a really high-quality wide receiver for them. Same thing with Adrian Demerson. I think he has the potential to be a high-quality safety for them. So there's a lot of positions where there's going to be a lot of high quality to them and starters, which is better than a lot of the NFL. And I think that's why a lot of teams or draft analysts are giving them A's, is because they drafted a lot of players, and 5 out of those players are going to end up becoming starters. But I draft based on how did you do in the draft collectively, and I draft a little bit different than everybody else. I grade differently than everybody else. I grade based on, are these draft picks based on data going to outperform their draft status? And most of the picks the Arizona Cardinals selected are not going to outperform their draft status. So that's the biggest thing that kind of drops them a little bit. And on top of that, a lot of those draft picks are just going to be backups, rotational prospects, or players that may not even be there in 4 years, just because of how poor they tested. So that's kind of how I see it. In terms of the overall draft class, I gave them a C, but in terms of adding, I would say this. I did kind of give them an F at first, but in terms of adding 5 prospects with starter ability, they got an A. So I'll split the difference and give them a C. So that's kind of what my grade is overall. So I'm not going to give them an F because I think that would just be ludicrous, because they did get 5 prospects. Again, 5 prospects with potential to be starters. But at the same time, I can't just give them an A, because the overall draft class in terms of pick per pick wasn't the best. So in other words, if they had picked less players, if they had not have picked past the 4th round, they probably would have had a better grade. But because they did what they did in the later rounds, that's why they got this grade. But overall, I want to know from you guys, what do you guys think about the Arizona Cardinals draft class? Would you rate it as a B, a C, a D, a F, or all those kinds of things? Comment section wise, if you want to put they haven't even played yet, or it's too early to grade them. Again, I'm basing my stuff on data. I'm basing my stuff on what has shown in the past to be able to show who's going to be an above average player and who's going to be a below average player. I'm basing it on statistical data. So if you don't like what I'm telling you, you shouldn't be watching my channel. Point blank, period. So I don't really have much time to argue with people these days, because I know what I'm doing has value. I've shown that value. I have other videos that have shown what the data can do and what it shows. So if you just want to argue that you shouldn't grade prospects after the draft, then you just would argue with a wall. I don't really have much time for people like that. We put too much time in terms of evaluating prospects and trying to educate you guys on them, for you guys to say that analysis doesn't matter anymore because they were drafted. But overall, those are my thoughts on the Arizona Cardinals draft class based on data. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on this video. Share it to as many people as you can. Also, check out my formerly known as Twitter account at Geometrics to follow me along there. Check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/jcoburn. Please subscribe, because you're going to get exclusive team-based data. So it's going to show and predict what the Arizona Cardinals might look like long term. That probably won't be out until about a week, but within a week you will be able to kind of see how the Arizona Cardinals, or what they're going to look like post-draft, and what their chances are in the AFC, actually not AFC, but NFC West. So be sure to check that out. And also, as always, guys, thank you guys so much for supporting the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.